Today we'll be talking about beer aged in caves.
We can't drink beer or go in caves. I'm Samuel Temple.
I'm Logan Ledman. This month on 1855, we'll be talking about the Fleckenstein Brewery and the impact it has had on Faribault.
The Fleckenstein Brewery was in business for over 100 years under various names, first fermenting their fizz in their family castle in Bavaria, Germany. Ernst and Gottfried Fleckenstein left their homeland in 1854, arriving in New York City. But let's back up a bit and talk about the Fleckenstein family.
This is Gottfried Fleckenstein, the eldest of the brothers who, with Ernst, started the first Fleckenstein's brewery. Speaking of Ernst, here he is now. Eventually he split up from his brother Gottfried and started his own, more successful company. So successful, in fact, that it outlived his brothers by 60 years. Louis Fleckenstein, son of Gottfried, briefly joined his father before the company closed. And then he went to work for the Ham Brewery in St. Paul.
We talked with Brian Schmidt, a local historian, about the Fleckenstein's journey.
I'm Brian Schmidt, lived in Faribault since 1971. I became interested in the Fleckenstein Brewery back in about 1974. We used to go down to the Fleckenstein Brewery and we used to dig for old bottles at the bottle dump at the Fleckenstein Brewery. And so over the years, I guess the history part just grew on me, and I thought it'd be kind of neat to save the history of the Fleckenstein Brewery for the city of Faribault and for all the people in Faribault. Just because the brewery life seemed like it was very interesting. Owning a brewery was very interesting. The history that they had for 108 years seemed like it was something to attach to and try to save as much as I possibly can with the local residents of Faribault. Because if you mention the word flex in Faribault, it just seems like it still has today an impact on life, because the Fleckenstein family was such a generous family to the Faribault residents. Say they needed a sports team to be sponsored, they would just go ahead and go down to the brewery and ask one of the Fleckenstein family members, hey, I got a softball team, could you sponsor our softball team or a bowling team? It seems like they really were a part of the residents of Faribault. They really like to give back to Faribault and surrounding communities. So the Fleckenstein family originated in Bavaria, Germany in about 1660, and they had a castle in Bavaria, Germany, where they actually brewed beer and spirits in the basement, the cellar of the castle. And they decided that they would like to move to the New World and come to the United States and start a brewery here. They came to Cincinnati, and then they decided to move to St. Paul, which they did brew beer in St. Paul for a couple of years. And then they heard of the sandstone bluffs along the river down here in Faribault. So they came down to investigate, and they chose the location of the Blue Cheese Factory. And in about 1854, they moved to Faribault, which was Gottfried Fleckenstein and Ernst Fleckenstein. And they started their own brewery along the Straight River.
Soon after the brewery started, Ernst broke away from the company. We're not entirely certain why he stopped working with his brother, but we also don't blame him. Riley.
Eli.
Ernst chose a new site upriver, rented out a house from a shutdown brewery, and started the Straight River Brewing Company. Many folks in Faribault still recognize where this company once stood.
And then Ernst Fleckenstein parted his way in about 1872, and he moved down the river to start his own brewery, which we know today as the Fleckenstein Brewery. And first he stopped along the west side of the river at a house. It was called the Pecan Brewery, and he rented that house from the Pecan Brewery, which was out of business at the time, to brew his own beer, which he called the Straight River Brewing Company. There's nothing in history besides it's a phone book that shows the Straight River Brewery 1893. But there's no other bottles or kegs or advertisement from the Straight River Brewery, because we assume that they only put it in kegs so they could deliver it to the local bars and stuff. or maybe the farmers would get a keg and have it on the fields when they got done farming or something like that, or putting up a barn. But there's nothing in history besides a 1893 phone book register that says the Straight River Brewery. And at that time, Ernst went back across the river on the east side, and he decided to look along the river, the sandstone bluffs, and pick out a place for himself to have his own brewery. Godfrey passed away, and then Lewis continued brewing there. First it was called Godfrey Beer, and then it was called Godfrey and Sons, and then it was called Lewis Fleckenstein Brewing Company. And that closed in about 1904.
For both the Gottfried and Ernst Fleckenstein breweries, immigrant workers were brought in to dig into our glorious sandstone bluffs and carve out that portion of the buildings. It would be here that they put the cave in their cave-aged beer, and they opened the tap room, where, for a pretty penny, folks could enjoy their beer in the glacial monuments they were brewed in.
The original brewery was located along the bluffs at 3rd and Oak Street, a location which now houses the Treasure Cave Cheese Company. Unfortunately, the company was shut down shortly after Gottfried's death in 1900. But the Fleckenstein name was still popular and successful because of Ernst's brewery.
And the Fleckenstein name was loved for many reasons. The Flex brand was a point of interest for anyone passing through the town. Posing in front of the iconic bottle was a must-do for tourists and locals alike. And Ernst was known for his generosity towards the citizens of Faribault, sponsoring any sports team that asked for a donation. What sport would that be?
Basketball, I think.
Yeah.
It looks like a basketball jersey. But then you'll never see a beer advertisement on a sports jersey. You know, so here's a bowling jersey.
Oh, wow.
With the bowling buttons on it.
Look at that. That is fantastic.
And this is a softball jersey.
Well, Jiminy Christmas. Profits for the Ernst Fleckenstein Brewing Company are on the steady incline. They were getting healthy backing from the community, and people were getting drunk by the minute. Well, nothing could possibly go wrong now. Well, goodness gracious.
Prohibition was an act of Congress that in 1919 said that the distribution, production, and manufacture of alcoholic beverages was in violation of the law. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were so many saloons in competition with each other that they had to resort to questionable alternative products, namely prostitution and gambling. For this reason, saloons and drinking became associated with immorality. This mindset is what the champions of the Prohibition movement had, and it's the reason that the 18th Amendment was passed.
Luckily, Flex had a backup plan, and it crushed the competition.
It affected it quite a bit as the brewing part of beer. They chose to go ahead and start making pop, and that kept the employees employed down to Fleckenstein Brewery for the time of Prohibition. And they had a couple different contracts. They had Orange Crush, and they were able to make Orange Crush for the Orange Crush Company, and also they did Hires Root Beer. And so after Prohibition, they knew how to do the pop, so they continued with their own flavors of pop, which then they had to call it the Flex Beverage Company. They had to change the name because they couldn't incorporate any kind of beer with the Prohibition.
Fondly called New Beer's Eve, the day before Prohibition was repealed, the streets in front of the Fleckenstein Brewery were lined with cars carrying passengers waiting for their legal booze. The minute the clock struck 12, kegs were pouring out and calls were pouring in from local restaurants wanting Flex back on tap.
Legal procurers of liquor were unfortunately not the only group interested in getting their hands on some nice Flex beer moolah. Some folks thought that they too could get in on the post-Prohibition cash grab, and they attempted to rob the brewery's safe.
Unfortunately for the would-be crooks, Ernst made a point of making daily deposits at the bank, so the vault was empty. Ironically, the robbers left the brewery yearning for a drink.
Beer and pop weren't the only things that Fleckenstein produced. Ernst slapped his name on anything he could get his hands on, including, but not limited to,
They would hand these out to anyone and everyone they could, spreading the Flex name like wildfire.
Artifacts like these were made up until the business's closing in 1964, and they still capture the interest of locals like Brian Schmidt.
Just to know a business could last that long in a small community for, like I say, 108 years, I think the impact on just knowing that a company like that can give back to a community and succeed for so many years like that, it's I think a good virtue for somebody to learn that if you give back to a community, there's a good chance to succeed with your lifelong dream. I think it had a large impact. Of course, they're in business for 108 years, and it was one of the local successful businesses in Faribault, along with like the Selner Tilt-A-Whirl and Nutting Truck and Caster Company. So the Fleckenstein Brewery was an icon business of Faribault. The history should be preserved for younger generations to learn from past and hopefully succeed better in life and stuff like that, to maybe find fault and do something better in life to continue. History is very important. I am a member of the Rice County Historical Society. I enjoy working down there with the history of Faribault and all the people down there, and trying to preserve the history of Faribault and the surrounding communities is a very important thing for anybody to do. After about 10 years, Shattuck St. Mary's decided to buy the property because a lot of the students were going down there and hanging out, and they didn't like that. So then they had Hazelton Construction come in about 1971, and they tore down the brewery, which is totally gone today. So if you walk down there today, it's back to Mother Nature again. It's all trees down there, and you'd never know it was a very successful brewery for 108 years here in Faribault.
But here's the kicker. Fleckenstein's was only produced to Faribault and the surrounding areas. All that fuss, that constant merchandising was for 516 square miles. Fleckenstein Brewery was a gift to Faribault and stood testament to the fact that you don't have to be a big business to do big things. Fleckenstein's was the champion of Faribault, made from the very soil that this city stands on, and it shows that we may be a small town, and the Fleckenstein name, it may bear no meaning to the rest of the country or even the state. But to us, here in Faribault, it shows the potential of the people and businesses that choose to take our town's motto to heart. Small town pride, big city opportunities. Logan and I would like to thank the State Bank of Faribault and the Cheesecake for letting us film on their property.
We would love to thank Brian Schmidt for giving us that fantastic interview, which basically made the video for us. It was fantastic, thank you.
And we'll see you next month, everybody.
Yes, we will.
We're going to get a drink. No, we're not.
No, that's against the law.
We're getting
Don't
Orange
forget about
Crush.
it. Orange Crush is good.